This episode is brought to you by DistroKid. DistroKid is the easiest way for musicians to get their music into all the platforms: Amazon, Apple, Tidal, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, and more. Plus, you've got unlimited uploads, and the artist keeps 100% of what they make. But what I love most about DistroKid is their app. The design of it just makes the whole process so easy. Now you can be sure that you're doing everything you need to do to get your music out there. Go to distrokid.com to check it out or download the app now.
Allow me to live and breathe like a man.
You've heard his words on classic albums like Pacific Ocean Blue and Friends. His 1969 collaboration with Brian Wilson, A World of Peace Must Come, gained almost legendary status as one of pop's most storied lost albums, before being resurrected to great acclaim by Light in the Attic in 2008. Now you're cordially invited to take a trip into the mind of poet and songwriter Stephen J. Kinich. Heyday Again Records presents I Love My Life, a postcard from one of the last standing poets of peace and excitation. Order your copy today. I Love My Life by Stephen J. Kinich and Friends. You'll see why heavy hitters like Brian Wilson, Dennis Wilson, Paul McCartney, Steve Cropper, P.F. Sloan, and Diana Ross have all worked with him. I Love My Life by Stephen J. Kinich. Order today at realgonemusic.com. Again, that's realgonemusic.com. I mean, it had to have been, in a sense, a little bit frightening to hear Pet Sounds because it's so perfect.
Yeah.
How did you then harness and utilize the harmony in your writing and recording at that time?
I realized that there were people who were better than me, and I wanted to be, the best I could. I want to be the best father. I want to be the best husband, the best musician, and I'll never make it, but at least I'm trying, And I realized when I was listening to Pet Sounds, just what could be done, what was possible to be done. That was one of the things that was great about Pet Sounds, is what could be done.
Welcome to another episode of Discograffiti's wildly in-depth Beach Boys series and Your Dreams Come True, where Brian Wilson freaks like you and me get our chance to delve deep into the barely believable history and prodigious discography of my favorite band of all time, and also coincidentally the best, along with a slew of over 50 top-shelf guests, ranging from musicians inspired by their work, family members, documentary directors, songwriting collaborators, Beach Boys authors, producers, touring band members, and for good measure, some of the Beach Boys themselves. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and special thanks goes out to co-producers Chuck Granata, Dennis Dykin, and Mark Freed, without whom this series would not have happened. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, along with our special guest, Graham Nash. Here's just a few of the many things that Graham discusses in this podcast. Why his journey to achieve greatness may have begun with the Hollies' failed attempt at Marrakesh Express, a peek into Crosby, Stills, and Nash's formation, the incredible method the Hollies used to test out their final mixes, that's in the director's cut only, the frustrating story behind the lost CSN album Human Highway, that's in the director's cut only, why it was felt that the chaos-evoking Neil Young was an essential add to the group, again, director's cut only, whether Graham is ultimately mostly a Beach Boys fan or a Brian Wilson fan, the songs in which Graham felt he came closest to the vulnerable intimacy of Pet Sounds, and how important LSD was to the person that Graham became. If you're a Beach Boys or Graham Nash superfan like me, you'll want to turn this free version off right now and opt for the director's cut of this episode on our Patreon page, which features 14 additional minutes of essential material. And you can find it in our Patreon shop for mere pennies at patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Or better yet, just subscribe for access to the complete versions of all our shows. I recommend the Lieutenant tier at the very least, so you can access those director's cuts, because they include every last moment that was intended for these episodes. But it's actually the major tier that you want if you want it all. Discograffiti tells a story each week, and that story is 4 episodes long. And that's what you get as a major. In fact, as you'll see, the Monday bonus episodes are going to be most of the best stuff. But even if you're on the fence, just head over there, because it's finally free to become a basic member. And you don't want to miss being notified about every single one of these episodes. Because coming up, we got an interview with Lenny Waronker, Denny Tedesco, and his incredible new documentary, The Immediate Family, an unprecedentedly intimate interview with Marilyn Wilson Rutherford and her cousin and Honey's bandmate Ginger Blake, Mike Love, Al Jardine, Bruce Johnston, Tony Asher, Jimmy Webb, Kim Fowley, Phil Ramone, Paul Tanner, Larry Knechtel, Don Randy, Dominic Priori, Bob Irwin, Mark Lynette, Billy Strange, Hal Blaine, Larry Levine, the Four Freshmen's manager Bill Wagner, Carol Kay, plus an incredibly special Graham Nash deep dive, in which Graham himself rates and discusses everything he's ever released. That means solo, CSN, CSNY, CNN, and for good measure, Crosby's If I Could Only Remember My Name. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then. Lads and ladies, in a world where having ideals is at this point deemed an inessential notion, simply an option but not at all mandatory anymore, I am incredibly proud to introduce a man who walks it like he talks it, and always has from his very beginnings as a songwriter. He held his own and successfully kept protected a true sweetness in a milieu where free love became self-love, and always with a congenial smile behind which nothing at all ever seemed to be hidden. And each of his songs always aimed at the heart. For a period when I was 7 years old, his song Cathedral was my all-time favorite, and since it was about a particularly crazy acid trip that Graham had experienced, I should have known I was in trouble from the start. He's one of the best there ever was. It's Graham Nash.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for that nice introduction. I appreciate it.
You know, I remember back when I was 14 years old, I started becoming obsessed with Crosby, Stills, and Nash. I remember at the time listening to So Far over and over and over again before I'd even dug into the records, of which at that point, of course, there weren't very many, but I just really could not get enough of the band. And the great thing about it is, as somebody who's just getting into music, as I was at the time, if you follow those tendrils back, there is so much music to discover using that as a launch-off point.
Yeah, pretty nice album. Yeah, I've been lucky enough to have some great musical partners, and David and Stephen are up there with it, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I knew that by the time Discograffiti's Beach Boys series reached Pet Sounds, that I had to bring you on. Do you know why?
Tell me.
I can't help, and honestly, this has been in my head, locked in my head for some time now. It's just an image that I cannot get rid of. Specifically of the Hollies version of Marrakesh Express, which is locked up in a vault somewhere and perhaps will be forever. And I know that you have said that the vibe of that recording was so unworkable that it was left in the can without a vocal gracing it. And that truly was the inspiration for me to reach out to you, because I see plentiful parallels between Brian's surf era material, which I'm still a huge fan of, all the way to Pet Sounds, and the Graham Nash of the Hollies to the Graham of CSN, because it's about the liberation of the artistic spirit. And yours was a very successful one. Your beginning point was, at least in a studio, with Stay with the Hollies from '64, which was your 45-minute live set performed twice, right?
Yeah, that was it.
And then, by the time you had actually gotten across the ocean, you had a successful journey to grow as an artist.
Right. The reason why there's no vocal on the Hollies version of Marrakesh Express is that there was no train in it.
Yeah.
Oh, it needed the pounding of a train going past you, you know, and it wasn't in the Hollies track, and therefore, you know, I didn't feel it was worth putting a vocal on, and it is still in the vault at Abbey Road somewhere.
Am I overthinking that experience wound up being like almost like a lever that got you moving in the direction you needed to go?
Absolutely, and also I'd written a song called King Midas in Reverse.
Sure.
And I thought it was a decent song. I thought we made a really interesting record of it. Our producer, Ron Richards, put an orchestra on it, you know, when we were away touring in Europe. And it worked beautifully, I thought. But it only got into the top 30. And normally the Hollies records would go into the top 10, you know. And I think that and Marrakesh Express, my experience with them recording that track really started me really realizing that I couldn't be with the Hollies anymore. And what happened is basically that I wanted to, I had a girlfriend at the time, Joni Mitchell, and I wanted to spend some time with Joan in Los Angeles. And David and Stephen were having dinner with Joni that night. And I must admit, we smoked a big one, you know, because Crosby always had the best dope with him. And David said, hey, Stephen, play Willie, that song that we're working on. Now, see, the Buffalo Springfield had broken up, and David had been throwing out the Birds, and they were trying to get kind of like an Everly Brothers thing together, you know. And they had this song that they were playing called You Don't Have to Cry.
Mm-hmm.
And they played the song, came to the end. I said, Stephen, what an incredibly great song. That's fantastic. Sing it again. And they looked at each other and they kind of shrugged and they sang it again. And when they got to the end of the second take, you know, the second time they sang it, I said, all right, I'm pretty good at what I do. I've learned David's body language. You know, I know when Stephen is going to start and end a phrase. I've learned the words. Do me a favor, sing it one last time. And they did. And 45 seconds into it, we had to stop and start laughing because there was magic in what happened when I put my harmony on top of their melody and lower harmony. And I realized at that point that I'd heard magic. I'm a musician. I know when magic happens in front of me, which was one of the things I loved about Pet Sounds and Sgt. Pepper and Revolver. And I realized that I would have to go back to England and leave the Hollies. And people thought I was crazy. What do you mean you're leaving the Hollies? All this success, all this money, all these girls, you know. But I'd heard magic. And I wanted to follow it, and that's why I moved to America. My last show was at the London Palladium with the Hollies on December, I think, like December the 8th. And December the 10th, I was in Los Angeles singing with David and Stephen.
This is 68, right?
Yeah.
Is it 68?
67.
67, okay. You know, it's interesting. The nature of time is such an incredible thing because, and I believe you were at Mama Cass's house, right? Is that?
No, that moment that we first sang together was in Joni's living room.
Oh, it was? Okay.
You know, Stephen always says that the night before we did it at Joni's, we did it at Cass Elliott's house. But I couldn't have been there. I was in London the night before.
Again, the nature of time. But, you know, what's interesting to me is, you know, you mentioned King Midas in Reverse. And to me, to be frank with you, I think that song is as good as anything you did in CSN. It's a brilliant pop song. In fact, I would go so far as to say that if King Midas in Reverse had never been written, there may not have been power pop. It almost created a genre along with the Beatles onto its own. And so, you know, these stories of Crosby, Stills and Nash, you know, they're tales that have slipped into legend. But, you know, I'm sure as time has gone on and you look back, you realize the import and the greatness of the work that you did with the Hollies as well, which you don't as often hear you talk about that one moment that things fell into place for the Hollies, but that work is truly important.
I really love that song, and I'm afraid that they're not trusting me with my musical direction after that helped me move. And then once I'd heard me and David and Stephen sing, it was all over for them, you know, as far as I was concerned.
Yeah. To get back to the Beach Boys, so at that time, the tale of the Beach Boys was a pretty unique one because Brian is as forward-looking as any musician who's ever been on the planet.
That's for sure.
He was caught in this uncomfortable middle zone of also having to act as a provider with family while trying to be an avant-garde, sometimes avant-garde with smile anyway, creator of music. These guys are kind of, in a sense, seen by a lot of people as representative of the old guard, at least once Monterey Pop happens, while all this growth around them, including you at the forefront with CSN, you're at the new guard. So was it thoroughly uncool of you to admit that you even liked these guys at the time?
No, because they were great. How could it be uncool to like the Beach Boys? They were really a great band. And as a matter of fact, day before yesterday, I went into a record store and I bought Smiley Smile in mono.
Nice.
The album in mono. And, you know, I've seen YouTube videos of Brian conducting the great band, and putting together Pet Sounds. And he was completely in charge of what he was supposed to be doing. The guy was a genius.
Obviously, you are one of the great harmony singers who ever was on this planet. I mean, it had to have been, in a sense, a little bit frightening to hear Pet Sounds because it's so perfect.
Yeah.
How did you then harness and utilize the harmony in your writing and recording at that time?
I realized that there were people that were better than me, and I wanted to be, the best I could. I want to be the best father. I want to be the best husband, the best musician, and I'll never make it, but at least I'm trying, And I realized when I was listening to Pet Sounds, just what could be done, what was possible to be done. That was one of the things that was great about Pet Sounds, is what could be done.
So what specifically did it teach you as a recording artist?
Well, listen to Caroline, unbelievable, Caroline, no, unbelievable track. And it made me want to do that. I didn't want to copy them, but they opened up an incredible door in my mind of what was possible to do, And when I joined David and Stephen and we did that first record, it's a pretty good harmony record, that record.
It really is.
I've been an incredibly lucky man, an incredibly lucky musician. And because, of my experience with the Hollies, with King Midas in Reverse, and with their track of Marrakesh Express, Crosby actually was at that last show that we did. And I played in Marrakesh Express on my acoustic guitar, which I'm still looking for, by the way. And he said, no, wait a second. That's a really decent song. They're crazy if they don't like this. And the worst thing that you can do to a musician, I believe, is give them self-doubt, is make them question. Criticism is fine. Good constructive criticism, I'm all for it. But don't make me feel like I'm less than what I am. And Crosby gave me that confidence back. And then, of course, when we made that and finished that first CSN record, we were all incredibly proud of it. And we knew it was going to be a hit. We just knew, because of all the hits I'd had with the Hollies and the hits that the Byrds had had and the hits that the Buffalo Springfield had had. You get a sense of what is radio lovely. And that first CSN record was definitely a radio record. You could hear it over, in everybody's college dorm window, from that entire summer.
Yeah. There's nothing on it that ever feels tired or old, no matter how many times you listen to it. There's so much more to talk about on this end, but let's set the needle down on the record. When we drop the needle down on Wouldn't It Be Nice, and Brian has so many of these songs, these kind of like young and in love, We'll Run Away. I don't know if you know that song. You could put together a whole collection of songs that are lyrically just leaning in this direction.
And also what Brian did so brilliantly was to start the record with a record where you wouldn't get up and take the needle off the record.
Right.
You'd want to hear what was next. And that's what we wanted to do when we were doing Deja Vu. I said to Stephen, I said, we don't have Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. And he said, I know, we used it. I said, no, we don't have that record where no one is going to get up and take the needle off the record. And he came back 2 days later, we'd carry on. But it was Brian that started it with Wouldn't It Be Nice, that taught us that.
Yeah, yeah. Carry On is sort of an extension of Questions, right? From
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. So do you feel that Pet Sounds was as much of an impetus? I know Cross loved Pet Sounds and loved Brian. Was it as big a thing with Stephen?
It had to be. Stephen is a brilliant record maker. He's a brilliant musician, particularly in those early days.
Yeah.
You know, there was no way that Stephen didn't like Pet Sounds. Not a shot in hell.
It's interesting to hear you talk about these guys as if, and to say that you feel like you could never be that great. When I think of harmony, there's not a lot of people that I would put at the top of the mountain. It really would be CSN, and specifically CSN, the Beach Boys, the Four Freshmen, the Everly Brothers. I believe you guys are as good.
Frankie Valli was good.
Absolutely, yeah. Are you taking the modes of harmony? I know Wouldn't It Be Nice was considered to be, by the group, the most difficult. Brian was the biggest slave driver through that song specifically. Did it feel like an insurmountable mountain to climb to create the types of intricate harmonies that he was doing here?
No, and what it did for me was want to listen to what the hell was coming next.
Right.
It's a brilliant record. And, I know that he may have been considered a slave driver, but it's very obvious from the videos that I've seen of the sessions of Pet Sounds that he knew exactly what he wanted. No, you can't hit that G bass on that thing because of the... Well, no, because you should. No, you shouldn't. Try C sharp. See? He was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
I'm not sure if you've drawn a delineating line, but would you consider yourself a Brian Wilson fan or a Beach Boys fan?
Brian Wilson.
Oh, okay. So can you talk further about that?
I think if you're listening to those Beach Boy records, yes, they can all sing. Yes, Mike Love can sing. Yes, Al Jardine can sing. Yes, Carl can sing. But it's the brilliance of Brian that makes all that music what it is, whether it's Beach Boys music or whether it's Brian Wilson music. It's his brilliance as a musician and his visionary ability as a musician that makes me a fan of Brian Wilson, not particularly of the Beach Boys, although I do love them, of course.
Okay, because, there is a notion, mainly, I think, set in play with David Leaf's book in 1978, that Brian Wilson is the ultimate creator, which I do believe. He's, unequaled, I believe. But that the Beach Boys was a responsibility that he had that wound up derailing him from being able to really fulfill his promise. And that in 1967, when the ride up to the top of the mountain was derailed by his responsibilities, that he never got back on track again, and it's the Beach Boys to blame. Is there any of that belief that you have?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much. I think the fact that he had brothers and great friends to take care of, to make sure that they had enough money, and do enough shows to make enough money to make them okay. And I think it may have derailed Brian a little, but look, we can only go from what we have. Yeah. And what we have is utter brilliance.
Truly. And so when we go into the next song, when we do hang around to see what comes around the bend from Wouldn't It Be Nice, You Still Believe in Me, which is one of the most angelic, as soon as it kicks in, you're in holy territory.
That's right. And once again, a musical journey.
And this was actually initially a song called In My Childhood, where he kept the backing track. The only thing that he kept was the piano, which I believe they had paper clips that were put on the piano strings to make it, and they were plucked by hand.
Fantastic.
And the bicycle bell in the background.
Who does that, right?
Yeah.
Brian Wilson does, yes.
Right. Those kinds of lyrics, even though he, has a lyricist come in sort of acting as his interpreter, what do you feel, Graham, is the closest that you've ever come to achieving that kind of delicate intimacy where you're really opening up your heart to communicate lyrically what's going on with you?
Probably Cathedral, and a song I wrote many years ago called Cold Rain, which is where I stood on the steps of the Midland Hotel in Manchester, and it was a rainy day. And I was looking at all these people walking around, probably hating their jobs and hating their bosses and stuff, and realizing, why me? What the fuck happened to me? Where I had the courage to leave a successful band and go and start another successful band that was even better. And so I think those two songs, maybe Cathedral, Wind on the Water, and Cold Rain, are pretty decent songs, I think.
Can you do me a favor? When I told you that story about Cathedral in the intro, I mean, that was truly, it was a song that I loved, but when I was that age, I remember I was, had my dad's vinyl of No Nukes, and so that was the version that I was hooked on. And I only had the vinyl, so I would play it, and then I'd write down the lyrics as I heard them. But you would sing in that one section especially in such a quick manner. I kept, bringing the needle up and down as I was writing out the lyrics so I could memorize them, so I could sing along to it with you. Can you please tell me what happened that day? You were on LSD, right? Oh, hi, I'm Dave Gebrow. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 5-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate weekly podcast for music obsessives thrive. But weekly wasn't enough for me, so I bumped it up to 4 shows a week. Becoming a subscriber to Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to hundreds of exclusive episodes. As a 2-show-per-week private, you get the weekly show by and for our Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. As a 3-show-a-week lieutenant, you'll get early release, ad-free, extended director's cuts of the main show. They're the shows as they were intended to be heard. Plus, you'll gain access to half the Patreon archive and the upcoming Beach Boys Behind the Mirror companion episodes, which will feature dozens of special guests from within the Beach Boys camp talking about and rating their music. But as a 4-show-per-week major, you'll be drowning in a flood of must-hear binge listening, because I'll be bombarding you with episodes about super cool bands that are too subterranean for free Fridays. It's like going to music college, but with a tuition that makes all kinds of sense. Plus, our entire Patreon archive is yours. Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off show, Queasy Listening, and the Private Press with Paul Major. And all that for the price of only a cup of coffee a week. Times are tough, you say? Fret not, because there's a $1 tier. Or you could just join as a basic member and buy episodes piecemeal from our Patreon shop. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Check out patreon.com/discograffiti to find the tier that's right for you. Once again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti. This episode is brought to you in part by Bespoke LA. Located in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles, Bespoke LA is the modern podcaster's dream come true. It's got 2 podcast pods available, one with audio only and the other with both audio and video. Just think, you can start your own podcast tomorrow without investing a single penny in equipment. What, you don't have experience editing? Don't even sweat it. For an additional fee, Bespoke LA can edit your podcast. Or not, it's entirely up to you. Rates start at $75 an hour with discounts if you book 4 sessions at once. Go to bespokela.com/podcast. That's BSPOKELA.com/podcast for more information or to book your time today. And be sure to tell them that Dave sent you for a one-time 25% discount.
In 71, CSNY were playing 2 shows at the Royal Albert Hall in London. And in between the 2 shows was a day off. And so what I decided to do with my day off was that I got into a Rolls-Royce car, brilliant car making. Told the driver to go to a dealer's house that I knew in London, and I scored some acid and took it. And I started to hallucinate in the back of that car about England and Germany, about World War I and World War II, and all these, Germans wanted to conquer England. And, I was hallucinating. I was fighting dragons and crossing swords, in my hallucinations. And about an hour later, we ended up at Stonehenge. And in those days, you could lie in the middle of Stonehenge. You could touch those rocks. And I did it for a long, long time. Felt like years. And after Stonehenge, a little further down the road is Winchester Cathedral. And I'm still peeking, of course, and I go through the front door and I'm walking up the nave towards that lovely statue of Jesus, and felt this very strange feeling in my legs. And I looked down and I was standing on the grave of a soldier that had died in 1799 on my birthday, February 2nd. Mm-hmm. And I wrote Cathedral. And it took me a while to get all the words right, because I understand that religion is very important and faith is very important to many people. I'm not a great fan of organized religion myself. I don't believe that God needs a 20. I just don't believe that. I believe in the energy of the universe, which is just enormous. And so I wrote Cathedral. And I have to tell people exactly that story, because if you don't know what caused me to write it, it sounds like a ridiculous song. But when you know exactly what happened to me and why I wrote it and how I wrote it, it becomes clearer.
It never sounded ridiculous to me. And the reason is the conviction with which you sing it is so intense that it just blows you away, and you have to take notice from the moment it starts. That's always been my experience with it.
Yeah, a beautiful beginning. The No Nukes version is a beautiful intro by Craig Durgee on keyboards. Brilliant, brilliant.
Denny Tedesco was just on the show with Don Randy. He's coming back next week to talk about The Immediate Family.
Ah, good.
Yeah. Some of the most important, I know we're getting off on a small tangent here, but certainly LSD was instrumental for Brian Wilson. And for me, I mean, some of the most important experiences of my entire life were on LSD, although at a certain point, I made sure that the door, at least with that drug, was closed. How important was that drug to the person you became?
I think very important. I think one of the greatest things that happened to me on acid was after we left Stonehenge, before we got to Winchester Cathedral, there's a small church there. And on the wall is the King Arthur's Round Table. Now, I know that it's probably fake, except that it's been there for 400 years, right? As I'm going into the church to see the Round Table, do you know what a beefeater is?
No.
Beefeater are one of the guards at the Tower of London in that red costume, you know.
Okay.
There was a guy standing there, kind of dressed like that, and he had a tray in his hand, and he said, "There you go." And I said, "What do you mean here I go?" He said, "You're a traveler on this road, and you're entitled to bread and water." And on the plate was little lumps of bread and little horn beakers of water. And I said, I'm not quite sure what's going on here. And he said, "Wait a second. Don't you know it's just okay to be?" And
he said that to you?
He said that to me. And I'm on acid. And so it was enormous to me.
Yeah.
An enormous thing to say to me right then. Don't you know it's just okay to be? Wow.
What a wild thing to have someone say to you in that state.
It was a very interesting acid trip, I'll tell you that.
Do you remember the last time you did it?
Did what?
Acid.
Yeah, I was at just outside of Los Angeles, maybe about 20 years ago.
Okay.
Because with acid, for me, it opened up a door, and you realize that, you know, you're really on a planet in space, you know, that's just a speck of dirt in this universe, and everything is meaningless. But at the same time, it's meaningful. And it was a very interesting acid trip, and it changed me a lot, and it helped me become the man I am, I think.
And you knew innately at that point that it was time to move away from it?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, my last time was 1998. I'm curious if, I love the man like crazy. I'm curious if being around Crosby all those years, did he wind up kind of ruining drugs for you?
He didn't ruin them for me. I mean, I tried taking as much as him. I tried taking more than him. I tried taking none. I tried. It was mainly cocaine that really set David off. But yeah, he loved acid. I never tried heroin at all, but I know David did. But it basically was cocaine that helped Crosby reach the end. I miss him desperately.
I know. And I know actually, the story of you guys reaching out and being right at the cusp of burying the hatchet right when he passed.
Yeah.
And I want to say, just on a side note, typically what I do in these shows is a discographical trawl of an artist. In other words, like each episode is an entire discography. And it would be a dream, especially since I am a huge fan, not just of CSN. I'm a big fan of Crosby and Nash. I would love to do another episode at any point in the future where we just talk about Crosby and Nash, all the work you guys did together, as a way to sort of aid in the closure, as it were.
I'd love to do that, kid. And I have to go in a moment, actually.
Oh, you do? Okay. So let's dive back into how much more time do you have, just so I know?
About 4 minutes.
4 minutes. Okay. Well, let's talk about, we're at track 4. Tell me then, what's the most meaningful track or two on the record?
Probably Caroline, no. Not only is it a beautiful melody, but it's a brilliant record. That particular song is unbelievable.
It's interesting, as a song being about the loss of innocence, you truly strike me, even as a man, you're
83.
You seem like you have the innocence of a child still to me. From everything I can gather from you, you still seem to have kept up enough of your protective wall to let none of that erode, for whatever it's worth.
I agree with you.
And God bless you for that. How about I Just Wasn't Made for These Times? Do you connect with that one as well?
Of course. Every single song on this record is fantastic, except, even Sloop John B is a great record, but it's only a personal feeling, but it should not be on that record. And I know that it was Capitol probably trying to, have a single, to make money from, but I don't believe that it should have been on the record.
It's kind of the one song that throws off, any possibility of this being a quote unquote concept album, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Although Brian has actually referred to it as a concept album only in the way of it being a production concept album.
Yeah. It's a brilliant, brilliant record. And if anyone has never heard Pet Sounds, you are in for a trip.
Is this your favorite record of all time?
That and Revolver and Sgt. Pepper.
Those are great ones. Those are definitely great records. Listen, Graham, I know you got to go. I can't even tell you how much your work means to me. And, I would really love to do a Crosby and Nash thing. Do you want to wait till your tour is done?
Yeah, that would be probably better.
You want to do it next month?
Yes, why not? May
it is. Do you know a date that's good for you, or do you want me to recommingle with you?
Probably in the first week of May.
Okay. I'm very, very excited. Graham, your new record's incredible. The entirety of your output is amazing. But I have to tell you, honestly, I'm most impressed with who you are as a person. And just keep searching, please.
I'm always searching, kid.
All right, that about does it. Stay tuned, because next week brings an interview with the world's foremost pet soundsologist about his recently unearthed treasure chest of pet sounds interviews. Wouldn't it be nice if Chuck Granada gave me all his pet sounds interviews? Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Sunday, our weekly show within a show, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast, drops for our Patreon's private tier. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Then come Monday, the major tier gets a very special treat. And man, do I mean special. Monday's bonus episode is part 5 of our conversation with Moby Grape and Skip Spence biographer Cam Cobb on the life of Skippy. In this episode, we'll be covering the 1970s and the stark, often terrifying territory post-Orr, when Skip chucks his psych meds out a car window to see how the other half lives. And spoiler alert, it ain't pretty. There will be a short sneak peek running publicly for free on Monday morning, but the entirety of the show will only be accessible on the major tier of our Patreon. So don't miss it, or you'll only be getting part of the story. And then on Wednesday, the Lieutenant tier gets their early release, ad-free, super extended director's cut of the Chuck Granata Pet Sounds Tapes podcast. It's the episode as it was truly intended to be heard, with all the essentials left intact. And then come Friday, everybody else gets to join in on the action. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Graham Nash, Mark Freed, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, Jay Schultz, Bespoke LA, my mom, my dad, Joe Kennedy for that killer new theme song, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator, and much, much more. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into the classic rock and roll from the 1960s is to go to the Beach Boys Season 1, Catch a Wave, 1961 to 1964, from episode 189 on, the Righteous Brothers Bill Medley interview, that's 181 and 182, my interview with the Free Design, that's 160 to 162, my epic interview with the Mamas and Papas Michelle Phillips, that's 141 to 159, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, that's 137, my 12-hour interview with Terry Kirkman and Jules Alexander from the Association, that's 109 to 113, Vashti Bunyan reading her entire output, that's 103 to 104. Sergio Diaz from Os Mutantes, that's 86 and 87. Bert Summer, that's 83 and 84. Sweetwater is episode 79. A tribute to David Crosby, 77 and 78. Andrew Tuttle rates the Monks, 74. Jim Florentine on Black Sabbath is 64 to 68. Lou Barlow on the Zombies is 59 and 60. Marvin Gaye biographer David Ritz rates Marvin Gaye, that's 45 to 47. Blind Faith is 43. Anthony Fantano rates the Velvet Underground, it's 32 and 33. Bob Forrest rates the band, is 25 and 27. Monkees manager Andrew Sandoval rates the Monkees, that's 22 and 23. Don Randy rates David Axelrod is 17. Badfinger is 16. The Bee Gees is 10 and 11. Sly and the Family Stone is 5, 6, and 7. And Pink Floyd is 1 and 2. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, July 4th, we're coming at you with the Chuck Granata Pet Sounds tapes. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!